We went 2 months ago to the Metro State Women's Prison as part of our mission Saturday. And 3 words that I've been focused on for ministry over the past couple of years, and particularly as I've come to be your pastor at Atlanta First. There's 3 words on which I hang, I think, most of all I do, both in ministry and in my personal life. Those 3 words are integrity, excellence, and service. And if you've been to the Metro State Women's Prison to serve there, you know when you walk down the stairs to the Women's Center, there's a painting or of a symbol on the wall. And the 3 words that are written below that symbol are integrity, excellence, and service. Kind of blew me away to think about my first day of serving here, and in that way is that those 3 words just popped out at me. They just stood off that wall as I really was going to something that I really didn't know what to expect. I'm just going to be honest with you. I think I've said this before, but as a pastor, you know, there's certain things that you figure you've been called to do, and there's other things you pray you never get called to do. And I just always kind of figured there were some preachers out there that just been really called to go into jails and do prison ministry, and I just figured I really wasn't one of those. I'll be honest with you. And as I made my way down there that morning, and as we walked through the gates, and as we walked through the doors, and as we walked down the stairs, I couldn't have imagined what the experience would be like to serve within the walls of a prison, to watch mothers and their children reunited, to watch some of those relationships and bonding that is there and some of those that are not, and to just think of how difficult that must be and how inadequate I was to serve in that place. As we've been talking this month, all this stuff really comes together and culminates in service, in helping others, being the hands and feet of Christ. As I wrote in the Messenger newsletter, for those of you that get it this week, that it is in our DNA as Christians and as Methodists, and it certainly has been built into the DNA of Atlanta First United Methodist Church, that we are a Matthew 25 church. That means that we're just not comfortable just sitting in the pews on Sunday, but there's something that draws us beyond the walls of this church, or pushes us beyond the walls of this church, to go and meet the needs of others in the community, to serve. But service alone, to me, without integrity and excellence, may not be enough. Just real quickly on those 3 words, for me, integrity is being the people that God created us to be. To not try to be anything else. Most of us probably have our hands full trying just to be what God created us to be. To do it with excellence. Now, that's not perfection, as the world knows it, but it's Christian perfection. Learning how to love as Christ loves, to be made perfect in this life in a way that we mirror and resemble Christ. That's what excellence means. Now, for many years in my life, for much of my life, perfection is meaning trying to do it better than anybody else, or not being happy with anything because it wasn't exactly the way I wanted it to be, when all it needs to be is what God needs it to be, not what I want it to be. If we're being the people God created us to be, if we're doing so in a way that meets God's needs as we go to serve, then surely we will make a difference. How many of you remember full-service gas stations? Full-service gas stations? There's a chuckle going up around the room, because today we pay more for gas than we've ever paid in our lives. And they got a little bucket of water with one of those little washers if you want to use it, and they got a little credit card machine out that you don't even have to interact with another human being to fill up your car with gas. But as a child, I remember the Gulf station at the corner of of Scott Boulevard in North Decatur. Does anybody remember that Gulf station? There's a man named Tommy that used to work there. And Tommy, every time my great aunt would pull up in her huge green Impala, Tommy and his men would surround her car. Miss Laura Francis, that's what she went by. We called her Tansy. Miss Laura Francis, fill her up for you today? Yeah, Tommy, fill her up for me. Miss Laura Francis, can we wash your windshield for you today? Yeah, that'd be nice. You know, the hood would pop up and you'd see the man, you're about a quart low, Miss Phillips. Can we go ahead and fill that up for you today? Sure, go right ahead. And then the floorboards were nice and flat. And they had those little whisk brooms. And they would go and they would sweep out your car, sweep out the floorboard. Now granted, you paid more for the gas when you went to a full service station. But when you left, you know your car was ready for the next few days. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that kind of service in many of respects is a things of a day gone by. I mean, we go in places and the drink machines are out where we can fill up our own drinks, which is nice if you're like me and you want to get 3 or 4 refills on your sweet tea. You go to the gas station, as I've said, you do all your own stuff. But what would it be like if, as Christians, we provided that kind of service to those who walk through our doors and to those we go to serve? What if we went out of our way? I've talked about this a little bit in bits and pieces. I talked about it a little bit on one of our Thursday services. One of the terms in modern church work, an ecclesiastical term, if you will, is radical hospitality. Now, in the South, we're supposed to know what that is. We're supposed to know about radical hospitality because we all know people in the South that are just the quintessential servers. Those people that we go into their homes and their ability to serve us and be among us is effortless. To greet us, to offer us some hors d'oeuvres and something to drink while all along the food is being prepared in the kitchen and the dining table is prepared just so, without breaking a sweat or acting as though anything in the world is causing them trouble. We sit for a beautifully prepared meal, we stretch out afterwards and sharing some coffee and some dessert, and we retire to the parlor and sharing some after-dinner conversation. There's so much of that we've lost, but we need to regain. A society and a culture in which we value relationships with each other, and most importantly, those whom we serve. Now, you'll know from my time here, as I've talked about serving others, there are 2 persons that come foremost to my mind when I think about service outside of Jesus. Mother Teresa and Martin Luther King Jr. And within those 2 in particular, and then I'd be in trouble with my Methodist brothers and sisters if I didn't talk about John and Charles Wesley. But Mother Teresa, if you can imagine a woman who came from fairly well-to-do family, who one day decides that her job is to go to Calcutta and to serve those that no one else in the world wants to touch. You give up everything and you leave it behind and you go to serve. We've talked about love. That was the first thing we talked about during this sermon series. Mother Teresa said this: love cannot remain by itself. Love by itself has no meaning. Love must be put into action, and that action is service. How do we put the love for God into action? By being faithful to our family, to the duties that God has entrusted to us. Whatever form we are, able or disabled, rich or poor, it is not how much we do, but how much love we put into the doing. Whatever form we are, able or disabled, rich or poor, it is not how much we do, but how much love we put into the doing. a lifelong of sharing of love with others. At the heart of silence is prayer. At the heart of prayer is faith. At the heart of faith is life. At the heart of life is service. We've got to serve to be alive. Now, we beat up on the disciples a little bit last week. I'm going to beat up on it a little bit more. Talked about James and John wanting to sit at the left and right hand of Jesus, and just following that little bit of exchange. The other 10, as I mentioned last week, they heard this, and they were not too happy with James and John, nor their mother. So when they heard it, they were angry with the two brothers. But Jesus called to them and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. It will not be so among you. For whoever wishes to be a great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Again, the disciples just don't get it. We are to love as God loves, and we are to serve as Christ served. And all the disciples could worry about was who was the greatest among them. And we do the same thing in our society. We think of those who are in high estate, of those who serve them, and that those that are in high estate are the ones with greater honor. Yet going back to the sermon we shared about no small part, we talked about the fact that the more inferior parts of the body have the greatest honor, and that nothing can be done without every single one of us using our gifts to do the work of God. Worship. Have you ever thought about what are we in? We're in a worship what? Service. We're in a worship service. Have you ever thought of worship as a form of service? As we humble ourselves, as we cause ourselves to be obedient to God's call to obey the day of rest, to come into God's house, to worship and to serve. The German word for worship is Gottesdienst. And it's a two-way street. It connotes God's service to us and our service to God. We come into this place and we've been given gifts to sing and to lead worship and to preach and to pray and to teach. We've been given gifts of fellowship and hospitality. And when we come into this place, we come to serve. Yet our worship is not an end in and of itself, yet a means to the end of going beyond the walls to the streets of Atlanta and beyond to serve. It is worship as a service of God to the congregation, and worship as the congregation's service before God. That means we can't come in here half-heartedly. That means we can't come in here trying to get our grocery list together for this afternoon. That means we can't come in here being depressed about the fact that Georgia Tech and Georgia both got walloped yesterday. We've got to come leaving all of that behind. Lord, I try to pull for the Bulldogs now because I'm married to one, but thank God they lost because I didn't want to hear it after we had lost early in the day and they had won. It's much better if we both lose. It just makes everything easier. I promise you, it makes it easier. We've got to come in this place prepared that God is going to do something great and challenge us with something awesome. And knowing only through Him are we able to do that to which we've been called. We've got to trust in God.